Andrew Jackson, the 7th President of the United States, once said, "If the people only understood the rank injustice of our money and banking system, there would be a revolution by tomorrow morning." He said this long before the creation of the Federal Reserve, because since its establishment, the banking system has changed drastically and now favors the rich even more than before. The problem is that most people don't understand how the system works. They don't know how money is created or how the Fed operates, so only a small minority benefits from this system at the expense of everyone else. Henry Ford, the famous American businessman, stated, "It is bad enough that people don't understand our banking and monetary system, because if they did, I believe there would be a revolution before tomorrow morning." Let's find out exactly what the banks don't want us to know, what they're hiding, and what you need to know to benefit from the system. If you're ready, like this video and follow it to the end. The first thing you need to know is that all money is debt. One of the fascinating things about people is that they spend their entire lives looking for jobs, working hard, or building businesses, all in the hope of earning more money. Yet most of us don't understand where money actually comes from. Why is this piece of paper considered money and not something else? Most importantly, it's just a piece of paper with some images and numbers, meaning someone is printing it. It certainly doesn't grow on trees or fall from the sky. Before you switch videos because you think you know the answer, let me clarify. No, it's not the government. In fact, the government borrows money just like you do. And trust me, it's more in debt than you can imagine. This seems strange because if the government doesn't print money, who does and who has the power to do so? As always, the government needs to build bridges, schools, and hospitals to support the country. But all of this requires money. In the past, gold and silver were money, so you either earned it or borrowed it from someone else. But in the modern world, it works differently. When the government needs money, it borrows from the Federal Reserve as a loan with interest. But where does the Federal Reserve or central banks get that money? They create it with ink and paper. So the government uses that money to build schools, hospitals, and public works. This is one way money enters the economy. People who receive money or are paid by the government deposit it in the bank, and then the bank lends it to someone else, spreading it throughout the world. But this is only how a small fraction of money is created. About 95% of money is nothing more than digits in computers, created by banks. When you deposit your money in the bank, they don't just keep it in a vault, they lend it to someone else at a higher interest rate, because that's how banks make money. But then, why does your bank account show that your money is still there, and that you can withdraw it whenever you want? Because banks are allowed to lend out 90% of deposited money and only keep 10% in reserve. So if you want to withdraw some of your money, you just have to go and take it out. Let's say you deposit 100 euros in the bank. The bank will lend out 90 euros, but at the same time, it will create another 90 euros to show you that your 100 euros is still in the bank. Those 90 euros will go to another bank, which will keep 10% and lend out the rest, creating even more money, and so on, until those initial 100 euros turn into $1,000 or more. This is how most money is created. That's why 95% of our money doesn't physically exist. The strangest thing about this system is that money, as soon as it's printed, is loaned to banks and the government. In other words, the government or banks must repay more money than actually exists in the system, meaning the debt can never be fully paid. For example, suppose there is no money in the system. If you borrow, Pataude, F-A road O-O milli T-H-E-F-E-D-A road A-L road E-S-A road V-A-O-O road A numéro O-O-T-H-A road C-A numero T road A-L-B-A numero K T-H-A-Y L-L-S-A-Y-Y-E-S-B-U-U-T-Y-O-O milli road PAYIT West ITH Battavada. $10 from the Federal Reserve or another central bank, they'll say yes, but you must repay it with $10.11. Now, the question is, where will I get that extra dollar if only $10 were created? The answer is nowhere. In short, we use these pieces of paper as money because we trust this system, but in reality, it's backed by nothing. That's why it's better to invest your money in real assets, like stocks, gold, or real estate. The second thing you need to know is who controls the central banks. Let's take the United States as an example. A spontaneous question arises. Who owns the Fed? To answer, we must go back in time and find out how the Federal Reserve was created. The United States wasn't always a financial powerhouse. In the 19th century, it was a turbulent country. The Civil War nearly destroyed it, and the financial market wasn't functioning well. It didn't even have a central bank to handle financial crises, unlike many European countries. In 1906, one of the most famous bankers of the time tried to make a fortune by driving up the stock of United Copper, a copper company, to force short sellers to buy back shares and cover their positions. But his plan failed, as the sellers found another way to acquire the shares. This move bankrupted the company and several banks. When the news spread, depositors rushed to withdraw their savings, and banks, left without liquidity, stopped lending money and declared bankruptcy one after another. The stock market plunged to historic lows. At the time, there was no central bank to restore depositors' confidence, so Wall Street turned to J.P. Morgan, who deposited part of his fortune in some banks to restore public trust, and convinced other wealthy bankers to do the same, saving the economy from a prolonged crisis. At that point, the US realized it couldn't rely on the goodwill of bankers and needed a central bank to intervene in such situations. But it wasn't easy, because the system involved many opposing parties, politicians representing the people, Wall Street bankers, and other wealthy individuals. Over 100 of the richest Americans met on Jekyll Island, Georgia, to decide what to do. And in 1913, the Federal Reserve was created. But the Fed isn't just one bank. It consists of 12 banks spread across the country. Each bank is required to keep 6% of its capital in the regional reserve bank, and in return owns shares in it. This means the Fed is owned by the other banks in the country. It seems the system couldn't be more distorted, as the big banks control the only entity with the power to manage crises and print dollars. Every major bank in the US is a publicly traded company, meaning that by buying their shares, you become one of their owners, and indirectly an owner of the Fed. The third thing to keep in mind is that your bank is not your financial planner. What most people don't understand is that banks don't act in your best interest. Their purpose isn't to help you achieve financial freedom, get the best deals, or solve your money problems. Banks are for-profit businesses that answer to their shareholders and, like any other company, will act in their own interest, selling products and services that benefit them, not you. Sometimes your interests may align with theirs, but that's not always the case. Every time a bank suggests you do something, it doesn't mean they're giving you the best possible advice. Before accepting any product, think for yourself. Don't agree to anything without reflection. Always compare rates with other banks, and don't be swayed by how nicely they treat you, because this could cost you a fortune in the long run. The fourth secret you should know is that the richer you are, the less banks charge you. The main purpose of banks should be to take money from those who have more and lend it to those who need it. That's how banks were born, but the financial system has evolved. When you live paycheck to paycheck, you're not valuable to banks. They can barely make money off you. At best, they'll offer you a small mortgage or a credit card, so you're not a valuable customer. However, if you're a billionaire, banks will offer you much more favorable terms, hoping you'll deposit your money with them or choose their bank as your primary financial institution. This is clearly seen in the interest rates they offer the ultra-rich, which are much lower than average rates. The last thing I want to teach you today is that a bank is a place to park your money, not to invest it. Some people get frustrated seeing the low interest rates banks offer today. It's almost impossible to get even a 1% return on fixed deposits. But it wasn't always like this. For much of history, lending money and collecting interest was a profitable business. Today, money has no intrinsic value, so banks are no longer seen as investment tools. It's better to think of them as institutions to manage your money. If you still want to keep your money in the bank, try buying their shares. For example, Goldman Sachs, one of the world's largest banks, pays a dividend yield of 2.1%, much higher than fixed deposit rates. Plus, you'll benefit from stock price appreciation, and most importantly, you won't just keep your money in the bank, you'll be one of its owners. Now that you know all the bank's secrets, like this video and follow me. Thanks for watching.